Okay, I'm going to leave that one open and running whilst we go through each of the individual presentations, and probably come back to it towards the end to just see where people are and where people feel, because I'm aware that you might want a little bit of time to just consider and think about what your particular answer is in that particular question. Okay.
I was just going to say, Gemma, some people are asking in the chat because they're not displaying, but now they are, so it's beautiful.
Now they are, yes. I don't know what was going on. So, yes, I've had to kind of come out of the full screen, and then for some reason after doing that, it worked. So let me just leave that reopen so that anyone who does want to go into that afterwards, but I will redisplay it later on. Okay. Okay, so to start with our main part of our session today, so we've got three presenters. We have Alison Gibson from the University of Birmingham, who's the head of digital education. We've got Nurun Nahar, who's an assistant professor and TEL lead at the University of Greater Manchester, and Dr. Lisa Bradley, who's the director of graduate studies at Queen's Business School. So we're going to start with Alison. And her presentation from the University of Birmingham. Alison, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. So title of my presentation today, to regulate or not to regulate. Now it's, I'm sure some of you will have sympathy for this. It's really hard to think of titles about generative AI these days. We're kind of inundated with information, aren't we? But I think this captures what I'm going to talk about for the next kind of 5 to 10 minutes. So first, just to introduce myself. So as Gemma said, my name's Alison Gibson. I'm one of the heads of digital education. So we actually have 5 heads of digital education here at Birmingham. I work with the College of Social Sciences. I also lead our digital assessment team, which is why I'm involved with this special interest group. I also lead our generative AI working group. So that's really where my interest comes in terms of this topic. Gemma, do you mind moving on to the next slide, please? So what I kind of wanted to cover today was really how we're approaching generative AI regulation here at the University of Birmingham, what that means, which sounds a bit dry. I just realized the word regulation doesn't exactly scream party, does it? But I think it actually is quite interesting. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've done from July 2023, when the Russell Group principles were first released. Some of the internal work that we've been doing here at Birmingham up until now, and then kind of looking ahead as well in terms of the discussions that we're having and the direction of travel in terms of where I see it going. Full disclosure, I'm not the person writing the policy. I'm certainly not in that kind of senior level of management. I'm approaching this from the point of view of the digital education team. We're a staff-facing unit, so our role is to support academic and education support staff. So that's where I kind of fit in terms of this topic. So as a lot of you will know, July 2023, the Russell Group principles came out, and this provided a really good baseline of consistency for a lot of our institutions. It meant we felt like we could say that we were pulling in the same direction. We acknowledged generative AI was here, that it was important, that staff and students had to learn how to use it, and we also acknowledged the challenges around academic integrity that it presented. So it was a really important first step for the sector, and certainly for us as an institution. Off the back of that, we created our own Birmingham generative AI framework. So this went into more detail for students. It was about how they could use it, when they could use it. We actually made changes to our degree classifications as well to say that students had to be able to use generative AI to be awarded their degrees. which is a really huge step. It's, you know, that's a bit of a game changer, really. The framework, of course, went into academic integrity, but from my point of view, at least, I think there was a really strong focus on student literacy. So it wasn't there was something very hopeful, I think, about this framework, and something quite ambitious. It was pointing the way forward into a future that we still aren't particularly clear about what it looks like, but saying we have a responsibility to look after our students and train our students on this new technology. So that kind of framework came out not long after the principles. And then a few other institutional things started happening not long after that to try and help us implement some of the information from that framework. So one thing we did, we tried the digital assessment tool Cadmus, which I'm sure some of you are aware of. Part of what they do, or say they do, is help identify when students might be using generative AI or copying from generative AI. That didn't quite work for us, so we've stopped using Cadmus now, but it was part of a whole range of things that we were trying at the time. There were a number of institutional projects. So there were these 5 institutional projects that ran. One on employability, because obviously our graduates are going out into the world of work, and we have to think about what generative AI means for their employability skills. There was student literacy. So the library supports student literacy, digital literacy, academic literacy, and they took up the mantle of generative AI literacy for students as well. Dissertations, of course, are a very vulnerable type of assessment, so there was a whole project looking at those. We collected case studies around how people were already using generative AI across the institution. And then we did staff literacy. So this is the one that sits within the digital education team. For us, what that looks like was, or is, a self-paced course for staff, which really aims to create a baseline of skills and knowledge embedded within the Birmingham context. So there's so much information. We all know there's brilliant courses out there that teach people how to use generative AI, but what we felt staff would really respond to is what that looks like in terms of the regulations at Birmingham. So things like you can say, oh, it's great, redesign your assessment, you know, so that students can use generative AI. That's a great way to adjust to this new world that we're in. And then if someone says, okay, well, what do I have to do to change my assessment? That brings it back very specifically into Birmingham regulations and policy. So we wanted to kind of bridge that gap between this is generative AI and all the things you can do with it and what that means on the ground for people in Birmingham. So that's a course that's it's still in development, actually. Myself and a colleague will be speaking about it at DigiFest, slight plug. So if you want to come in and hear a little bit more about that course, come and find us at DigiFest. Gemma, do you mind moving on to the next slide, please? So that kind of takes us really from July 2023 up until now. You can hopefully see that you know, we're using the word framework rather than regulations. It's about supporting staff literacy, supporting student literacy, rather than mandating a huge amount. And the discussions are really ongoing in this area. And I think, like a lot of institutions here, it's going to be really interesting to see where this takes us. One of the focuses that we have, and this is being driven a lot by IT, I will say, is trying to understand the landscape in terms of what students are using and when and why. So students, like staff, come in a whole spectrum. Some of them absolutely love generative AI, will use it as much as possible. Understand that no, a dozen different different tools that they can use for different things. And some are so nervous that they'll get caught for plagiarism that they just won't go near it. And we as an institution, and I'm sure from all your institutions as well, have to find a way to cater for that entire spectrum of students, that entire spectrum of staff, and try and move everyone in the same direction, which is quite difficult. And one of the things that makes it quite difficult, of course, is that there are still some really difficult questions that need to be answered, or perhaps even can't be answered. And questions like, can you mandate something that's changing so quickly? So this technology is changing so rapidly. How do you write regulations with any kind of specificity? That's really difficult. How do you mandate something when a lot of people, staff and students, have very reasonable ethical concerns about using it? And that's come up a number of times at Birmingham. The constant issue in this kind of industry is how you keep guidance up to date when everything's changing all over the place. We're a Microsoft institution, so our institutional tool is Copilot. So we try to frame our guidance around the use of Copilot, but I don't think we've quite figured out what to do about the entire world of other generative AI tools that's out there and how people are using them and how to deal with the fact that people are using them. I think there's a tension as well between saying students must use generative AI in their assessment, or they can't use generative AI in their assessment, and the impacts that that has on students who might be using the tools for accessibility reasons. And I think there's a tension there that we're still finding our way through. And then always at the end of the day, we'll come back to academic integrity and what all of this means for our degree programs. So I'm sure a lot of these questions are questions that you're all facing at your institutions as well. And in terms of what we do next, I think forums like this, where we get the chance to share where we're up to and the discussions that we're having are so important. I do feel like we're making progress. It's kind of millimeter by millimeter we're clawing our way through. But we are making progress, and I think it's going to be great to hear what Nurun and Lisa have to say as well, and then the rest of the people on the call, because I do think that it's only really from learning from each other in these kinds of forums that we'll start making a little bit more progress with some of these really thorny questions that we're all facing. So Nurun, I'll hand over to you now. I think we'll probably do questions at the end.
Thank you, Alison. Gemma, if I could have my slides up, please. Okay, so I am going to be talking or taking a very, I think, a reflective dive into this. What was my journey like? And from a teaching-focused role, how did I find some of these challenges? How did I actually tackle some of these challenges with generative AI? And to also, I think, engage you all in a discussion to see what we can do as a group, as a community, to discuss the future of generative AI for digital assessments. So I'm an assistant professor, and I'm in a teaching-focused role where I teach on accountancy and business programs. And what I've seen is that, next slide, please, Gemma. And what I've seen is that I think, like many institutions at the beginning, in our institution as well, we were grappling with how do we actually tackle this newly, landed problem, and which is proving quite challenging, not just for students, but for educators and for anybody in higher education as a practitioner, as a researcher. So we initially were just observing what other institutions are doing. We were keeping up to date with the rest of group institution policies and some of the other institutions that were, I think, quite on the forefront of how we can tackle generative AI or challenges with generative AI and what we can actually do in order to welcome some of the opportunities that are presented to us with generative AI technologies. So We did acknowledge that institutionally that generative AI is actually transforming how we are assessing our students, and we needed to shift our focus from what we are assessing and why we're assessing. And so we encouraged all our academics in teaching focused rule to think about their assessments. Is there an opportunity for them to ensure that the assessments are authentic, designed in an authentic way, so that it will perhaps to some extent reduce the cases of academic misconduct, or if possible, could generative AI be allowed to use in those assessments? If so, then what are we assessing with generative AI by asking students to use generative AI assessments, and what are the implications for it when marking? So some of the questions I think I would like colleagues here to consider, perhaps contributing to the chat forum, is it actually driving a shift from focusing on the products of assessment, emphasizing on really the process of it? What is the process involved in assessing our students? And then how can we move forward for digital assessments and to envision it in an age of generative AI? Next slide, please, Gemma. So with generative AI, I think most of us by now know that it has got multimodal capacities, and there are opportunities for us to look at how we can use these multimodal features of generative AI technologies into formative as well as summative assessments. And there was this really interesting talk I came across from Professor Dragan Gestovic presenting about the huge challenges that face academics, researchers, particularly the education sector, around the use of generative AI technologies and assessments in particular, and whether it's really an opportunity for us to think about focusing more on the process, which really would sit at the core of assessment in the age of generative AI. So generative AI technologies actually give us an opportunity to consider the methods and the techniques that are used in assessments, and whether there's an opportunity for us to change the context in which we assess our students, or to revisit how we can design our formative and summative assessments in a way that focuses more on the process of assessment rather than the outcome itself. Next slide, please. So I think with generative AI, it gives us an opportunity to look at whether we can, instead of having endpoint assessments or bulk assessments right in the middle of the semester or the end of the semester or a term, how we can use these kind of technologies, or perhaps utilize some of its potential to create an environment where we are continuously assessing our students, but in an adaptive way, and assessments which promote authentic learning. And by continuous, I mean focusing more on formative assessments than summative assessments, or if we are doing summative assessments, then having a really good balance between formative and summative assessments, but considering how we can utilize these technologies in the process. So I think when we discuss the opportunities with generative AI, we are also thinking about how we adapt our pedagogic approaches, whether we want to focus on our learners, what are they actually, when students join university, so what are they actually aiming for, what kind of achievements are they intending the academics support them with. So in the whole process, where can we actually focus on the human skills that we can support students to achieve, where AI technologies can be used to complement this, in addition to using them with using them in the format of formative assessments or summative assessments, but using various digital technologies there. So I think for us, particularly for me, it has been trying to see whether there is an opportunity for us to look at using digital assessments, so using generative AI for digital assessments, whether we have a really a good opportunity for us to push students' cognitive abilities from a zone of low to high proximal development, and then ensuring that this is aligned to institutional strategies. This is aligned to program level learning outcomes, as well as program level objectives, as well as module level learning outcomes, so that it gives a holistic environment for our students to grow and learn. Next slide, please. So how I've been using it in my own practice, because I think at our institution at the moment, we're going through a huge transformation. And so there is some guidance on how students can, or where students are allowed to use generative AI, and how educators or academics can encourage or discourage students from using generative AI tools or technologies in the assessment process. So they can use it in assessments, but there are strict guidelines. So we are using a traffic light system. I think probably many colleagues here will be familiar with this process. It's adapted from Mike Perkins and Perkins et al. AI assessment scale. So we have asked our academics to indicate in the assessment brief clearly whether the students can use generative AI technologies to complete any part of the assessment, or whether they are prohibited from using it for any process involved in completing the assessment. And then we also give them an option where they can design AI into the assessment, and AI may or may not be used for completing part or the whole assessment. So I think in my case, I've been promoting the use of generative AI technologies in assessments, both in formative and summative context. So for example, this semester with the, I think, popularity of Notebook LM, I've converted some of my assessment briefs into podcasts, and also generated some notes, and asked my students that go through this podcast, and you can actually upload the assessment brief onto your Notebook LM accounts, and you can generate your own personalized podcast for it, and interact with the Notebook LM's different features to understand the assessment tasks in your own way, and to clarify any confusions or doubts you may have about the assessment. So basically to use it as a learning partner. And then I've also used a custom GPT, which was trained as a Socratic partner, to support students with receiving feedback on a draft they would produce for a summative coursework, because sometimes we are quite time poor, and despite how much we may want to give personalized feedback to our students, our workload allocation model does not always permit us to, I think, allow enough time or have enough provision within our timetables to do that. So having a custom GPT to allow students to receive formative feedback on their drafts, and to receive formative feedback, I think that really helped my students on a module last semester. And I think I've also been looking at how I can use this kind of technologies in formative assessments to design formative activities, which will help students understand about assessment literacy and also feedback literacy. Next slide, please, Gemma. So I think as an institution, we have also been experiencing some of these common challenges that many institutions are experiencing with regards to whether to adopt generative AI technologies in everyday processes of teaching, assessments, learning, supporting students, or whether to take a very cautious approach to it, and where can we actually find a balance in between. So I think one of the key challenges that we have been dealing with is, first of all, resistance to change. I think a lot of academics, they are not very keen on shifting their mindset or moving away from the traditional assessments or the conventional assessments, and to look at how we can rethink assessment design to make it compatible or to suit the current context we are in with generative AI technologies and the challenges it poses for us. And the other challenge is not many colleagues are currently comfortable to invest their time, or perhaps to invest in CPD opportunities to understand fully the capabilities of AI technologies. And the other problem is that once we are, for example, encouraging colleagues to use particular generative AI technologies, then suddenly there is a paywall. And so if you want to access additional features, then you would have to subscribe to it. And I think we all know that there is an app for everything now. So generative AI technologies are embedded into many tools, learning technologies that we have used in the past, and are coming up new in the market. And then I think the most I would say or a key concern, a significant concern for us is that who is feeding all this data into the generative AI technologies, or how has this data been reviewed? Who is identifying, or is there any framework applicable in the process where, when these generative AI technologies are programmed, they are trained on not passing off any information that's racially biased or culturally biased? And how can us as academics, practitioners, or researchers be trained to understand, when we are receiving a response from generative AI technologies, how to ensure that it's taking into consideration EDI concerns. A lack of AI literacy skills is a key concern as well, because we, at the moment in the institution, we do not have a centralized policy where staff are supported, or I think I would say supported with infrastructure, or have funding to be AI literate. And so it's up to the colleagues, it's up to individual academics, practitioners, researchers to seek that opportunity to make, I think, or to be AI literate. So a number of challenges I think we are facing as a sector and as an institution in this case. Next slide, please. So this is again from a personal perspective, how I've been dealing with it, and from my own practice, how I've been trying to keep myself up to date, and more importantly, trying to build a community where we are sharing good practice with the application of generative AI technology. So I've launched this CPD series 2 years ago, and through that, my initial intention was to bring together academics from within the University of Bolton, currently University of Greater Manchester, and from outside or external from institutions to share as a community, or to discuss as a community some of these challenges that face us with the advent of generative AI technologies. So bringing minds together, involving different stakeholders, and then where possible, engaging in community conversations or discussions through LTH tweet chat. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's also on Blue Sky now, on what other institutions are doing, what are some good practices around it, what are being done by the sector to promote responsible or meaningful use of generative AI technologies in assessment, for teaching, and for learning. So for me, I think the best way to address the challenges and also harness the opportunities is to create a sustainable system or education system, and this can be only done through collaboration. And I think I would want to now invite you to and also contribute to our Padlet, which Gemma will be introducing later on, to see how as a group, as a SIG, we can I think create some guidelines perhaps, or perhaps set some vision for us to work with these technologies, but in a meaningful context for assessments. Next slide, please. I think that's my last slide. Oh, wasn't there another one before this? Yeah, that's the last one. Well, thank you very much. I think I'll transfer over to Lisa now.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Lisa.
Perfect, that's great. Good morning everyone, and welcome, and hope you're all managed to hang on until payday like I am. I suppose for the purposes of transparency, I'm not a technical expert and rely very much on many of you on this call for the expertise that you bring. So really I'm speaking from my role in the business school as Director of Graduate Studies, and just the conversations that we're having around AI, or as I call it, artificially enhanced assessment, and how we might deal with that. So really, what's the problem? And I put together this slide, Gemma, if you sort of move on there, just sort of outlining the issues that we're talking about and what's really going on. And the first thing is just burnout. And everything I'm talking about here, I'm talking about staff and students. I'm not making a difference. But what we find is that there's just so much going on, and it's 24/7, and that's really affecting behaviours of staff and students. Our heads are just so filled with information and stimulus and versions and things coming at it. It can become really heavy to carry, and it's becoming a real burden. And with all of that, then we're making mistakes. The risk of making mistakes seems to get higher all the time. And we want something or someone to come in and check what we're doing and say that we're doing okay. And in this world of incredible opportunities to connect, we find a big increase in loneliness and isolation, and that ability to develop those range of skills that are needed and are looked for are becoming more and more difficult as people retreat behind a lot of the technology. AI, it's out there. We know it's there. It's not a secret anymore. We know people are using it. But again, how do we consider how to use that, the ethical concerns, the right way to use it, the wrong way to use it, and that's causing big concerns around our staff, particularly with what we call ghost students. I don't know if you've found these types of students who they appear on your lists at some point, and you've no interactions, no communications with them, but suddenly they submit an assessment. And we're in this very difficult position of these ghost students of knowing what to do with that. Do we mark that work? If they've paid for their module, they've registered and submitted a piece of work. How do we even know who a student is anymore, or what they look like, and how they've changed by the learning that we provided with them? We all had then this issue with mental health, and rightly mental health is higher on the agenda. But I found out that our brains are very clever, and our brains, whenever we try and ask too much of them, are very clever in saying no and stopping, and we end up with mental gaps, we end up with breaks, we end up with not being able to access the information that we need. We also have this problem with connectivity. So we've got so much connectivity, it's global, we have different ways of accessing information, and sometimes it can actually get too much. But really, I think the hardest part is just starting. So just embracing the opportunities, talking to people about the changes, and how we might deal with that around assessment and feedback, and just getting started. And what we have within the business school is we've set up a AI stream as part of our learning and teaching forum, just to help people get started, because I think that's also a big part of the problem. But if we look at the next slide, if we actually wrap this all up, I feel the biggest issue is trust. Trust has broken down between staff and students. That relationship between staff and students has now irreversibly changed, and that's having really negative consequences. So from staff's point of view, they look at students and they don't look at them the same as they did before, because that idea of trust. Have you done the work? Have you put the hours in? Have you written this yourself? Is this a genuine reference? Have you done what I've asked of you? And at the same time, students are looking at staff and saying, well, why are you giving me this information? I could have just typed that in, and someone could have given me that information. What value are you adding? Why should I bother coming to class? What difference are you making? And particularly when it comes to feedback, again, I get lots of students who would talk to me, and because a lot of staff would use and have been encouraged to use rubrics and to provide feedback, and to ensure that we're addressing all the areas that we've asked for in assessment. And what has happened is they created really good feedback, which is correct, which is the right feedback. But students say to me, don't they know that we talk to each other? So they compare their feedback. So they look to other students, they compare their feedback. And if they see repetitive feedback or repetitive lines, because we've copied and pasted those lines, which are the correct feedback, they then discount it completely, because what they feel is, oh, you've just said that, that's not a meaningful piece of feedback, and therefore I'm not going to pay any attention to it, and therefore I now don't feel like the feedback that you've given me has had the value, or that you've put the effort in to actually read my work and give me a mark that reflects the work that we've put in. And at the same time, staff are looking at that work and thinking, am I putting more effort into reading this than the student has actually put in to writing it in the first place? And maybe I'm the first human who's actually read the information that has been put forward. Because again, we can see that sometimes work that's submitted, hasn't had that sense check by humans. So that breakdown of trust, and how we re-establish this, and how we change the relationship in a world where AI is going to exist and has a lot of benefits for academia. How do we deal with and how we work with around that? So how are we dealing with that in the business school? If we go to the next slide, I'll tell you the sort of things that's happening that I'm seeing, that the current practice. The first one is what I've just said, is business as usual. So just if it's the next slide, Gemma. So I do speak quite quickly, being from Northern Ireland. So the first one is business as usual. So this is where I've noticed that staff are completely ignoring and being oblivious to AI and how it has changed things. So they don't live in it, they don't care about it. I see the similar assessments, and still I see essays being asked for by students. I also have other staff that are not oblivious at all, but are doing the business as usual for one of two reasons. The first is it's just too much effort for me to try and sort this. So really, until someone knocks on my door and says I have to change, I'm not going to. And secondly, they're actually so afraid of the AI that they don't want to open that can of worms, because they feel that they may not be able to cope if that does happen, and they would have no idea how to address that. So instead, they operate business as usual. I'm going to assume all students have approached this in the way that I've asked them, and provided the information in the way that I've asked them. The second that I've seen is a lot of use of declarations. So AI declarations. I have used AI to support the workings of my assessment, and staff like that, because it sort of like lets them off the hook, because if you've declared that you've used it, I can then mark it, and I don't have to worry about chasing you to question or prove whether or not that you have used AI. And again, that is helpful in terms of conversations with the students about AI. But generally, if you're not actually providing the training in AI, if you're not actually providing the support around it, simply adding a declaration is really only a plaster on what the underlying problem is, and doesn't actually help students deciding, should I declare this or not? Am I going to be thought badly of if I declare it? Because I can see that the member of staff writing the assessment and saying I can declare, but hasn't actually told me how they're going to deal with that if I say that I do. So that worries them. I've seen a lot of staff going, we're just going to go back to exams. We're just going to have people in a hall, someone walking up and down and doing lots and lots of work. And while we can't get away from exams, so in the business school, we've lots of professional bodies who are also concerned about AI and insisting on exams, but really relative to the number of modules that we have that require assessment, we actually have a very small number of exams that would be essential. And what we need is more staff to actually look at alternative ways of providing invigilated assessment. So I try and take people away from the word exams. And more recently, I was able to secure some funding to get software for our computer suites that allows us to shut down parts of the computer. So it's very easy to switch the internet off on a computer, as you know, but how does someone complete an online assessment? How do they upload into Canvas or into Moodle or Blackboard their completed assignment if you cut off access to the internet? So it's been really useful in terms of being able to limit what students can access, but they can access, for example, their Canvas site. Is quite a bit of work and prep for that, because you've got to obviously hide, for instance, a lot of the information that you want to have access to. But again, this comes back to the trust issue. Because it's been invigilated, because it's in a controlled environment, there may be still students who are able to access materials that maybe they shouldn't, but the perception among the students is that it's fair and everyone is in the same place and at least someone is checking, and they don't get that sense when they're not. And that has helped for some of our assessments. But again, looking at things like unseen case studies, looking at in-person assessments that could be open book, that idea of just trying to reframe what we consider as an invigilated assessment. What we don't want is a backward step of going into exams, because I've never seen a situation in the world of work where someone has said, oh, that skill that I developed doing exams has actually really helped me solve this real world problem. So I'm not an advocate of going back to exams and class tests. Then we have like the technical experts. So these are the people that have all the subscriptions and have all the different models and use one for generating some pictures and another one for getting research and one for writing and one for doing tables and analyzing data. And that's brilliant if you are one of those people. And what I can say is you're really intimidating. So whenever us non-experts are chatting to you and you're talking about that today was the latest updates to version 6.4 of the app ABC, we have no idea how to talk to and deal with that. So it's brilliant that you're ahead of us. But please, when you're talking to us non-experts, see if you can find a way to bring us into your world. That would be really, really useful. And then we have other staff that have been just waiting for this. They've just been waiting for the world to finally wake up to AI, and they have been able to let loose. And these are the modules that the students are really adoring, because they can see that there's a mutual sort of understanding of the issues. But really, how do we just make sure that assessment is authentic and genuine? Do we care about how much effort students put into assessment? Do we care about the learning? Do we care about transformation? And really, this comes down to, if you just look at the next slide, Gemma, the opportunities and threats that come into place. And for us, what we found is there's been lots of like special interest groups and conversations that AI has allowed to happen, because you've that sharing of expertise. And probably in my institution, it's the first time we've really had cross-faculty and cross-staff groups interest in Gen AI and how we talk about it and how we solve it, because everyone has a different level of expertise. If you look at your learning technologists, if you look at those on the computing programs, engineering programs, medical, whereas in the past when we tried to talk about things like assessments and teaching practice, it was like, oh, it's very, very different in a lab than what it would be in a classroom, or mathematical, or out in the field. And whereas this is almost like a shared issue that we have, and we're really keen to work together and support each other. Great opportunity in relation to marking. I haven't managed to suss that yet, but if anyone could help me and how I can manage marking. I used to say that I thought doing assessments and exams was bad until I had to mark them, and then that is way worse. So anything that can help on that. But more importantly, able to provide the personalized feedback, because the feedback students get the right feedback, but because they don't feel it's personalized, they devalue it, and we need to find a way to engage them in that. My biggest concern is this idea of a lack of confidence. I really care about what you think. I'm really interested in your ideas. I don't care if the grammar is correct. I don't care that it eloquently flows. But I find that students, they're afraid, they don't value, their own work, their own speeches, because when they put something into Gen AI, it just looks so much better. It reads so well that they look and go, what I could do couldn't sound like that. Therefore, what I have to say is not valued. And that is not true at all. And I really want to try and find a way of addressing the fact that I'm looking and I'm marking it. I'm not looking for something to be perfect. In fact, it's very off-putting. It makes it very uninteresting to engage in. And I really want to bring back that idea that what you have to say and what you found and what you've read is actually really interesting, and it's something worth sharing. We know that we've got to get our students work ready. We know we've got to work with our businesses and support them in dealing with AI. AI is not a university problem. It's something that's in the real world. And we know that with the sharing of information and with how we engage now through the likes of blogs, being able to have that skill and be ready is important. And we know that information, is it true, is it not? Generating information that is out there doesn't mean that it's been fact checked. But there's a great opportunity in relation to productivity and really using our time better and having out of office support. Again, we see a big trend away from contacting people outside of office hours, which is absolutely correct. But then our work patterns are different. So if our work patterns are different, how do we manage and work around being able to be productive ourselves? And that's where the technology has been brilliant. So just sort of my last slide, the next one, I just want to talk about what's happening institutionally. And again, probably very similar as what's happening in your institutions. So the first thing is we have areas that are staff only. So we have like online areas that you can join or are joined as a member of staff that give you access to resources, blogs, ideas, and again, I'm not sure how staff who aren't comfortable with the AI are actually engaging with those. And we've actually found that special interest groups and working groups are actually been much more productive in terms of actually making changes and engaging people. We've had changes to policy, but the reason that we have issues with the policy is that we have policy designed by experts who have lots of experience in policy making, but in fact, it's a bit like our generation in relation to the previous generations and using video recorders and then using mobile phones, and that the best people to talk about and actually design policy are the people who have the expertise, not the people who are in the institution a long time. And that's where co-design has been the most successful for us. Talking to the students, engaging with them, working with them. What type of assessment can we do? What are the concerns you have around AI? And that idea of generating student resources. We know that there's different prices and different fees for different technologies, and that is not equal and fair for everyone. I know that some institutions have set up their own Gen AI resources. That's not something that we have invested in, and again, a lot of positives and negatives on that. And then lastly, we've updated the academic offences panels. But again, staff are just so unwilling to bring students forward because it's so difficult to prove. The one that has been brought forward recently is because the reference list has references that the person can't find. But that doesn't mean they don't exist. So again, essentially it will come down to the meeting of the student and the student being able to show that they found this reference and it does exist and they have actually read it. So again, very much will be interesting to see how that plays out. But just my last slide, just Gemma, it's just to remind everyone that actually you're important, you're valued, your opinions matter. Please stay involved, please stay engaged, help us know what to do next in relation to what we should look at, what webinars you need, what workshops you need. And please don't strive for perfection. If you notice people around you are starting to struggle and they're starting to lose themselves, and starting to communicate in different ways, just support each other. And thank you so much just for taking the time to listen to me this morning, and maybe it'll resonate with some of the issues that you're finding in your institutions as well. But I'm going to hand back to Gemma now. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you. Thank you all of you, actually. Just before we move on to our second section, I just want to see if anyone's got any questions for our speakers today. I noticed that we've had a couple of answers go through into the chat as well as people have been working through. So I think most of the ones that came in previously have been answered. So the ones that are coming in now are the ones that I'll bring up first. So we've got one for Alison, which is how do you reach the thousands of students in your university, and how do you ensure that they read the policies?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I think ensure is a really big verb to use there. I think we hope they read them. We do everything we can to make them accessible. We've started at an institutional level, so we have institutional framework, as I was talking about, but also the library has a course for students, which was set up with the help of students, and that sits institutionally. I think there's some work that Gemma and myself will be doing over the next kind of month or so, which is looking at what's happening at a local level, because there's lots of stuff happening at a local level that we don't really know. And I think over the next probably 3 to 6 months, what we're going to be trying to do is kind of close that gap. We're bringing down the institutional information and we're bringing up the local information, and we'll try to meet in the middle. But I wouldn't suggest at all that we've reached every student. At the end of the day, guidance to students says talk to your teacher if you don't know whether you're allowed to use generative AI. And that's as much as we can say and as much as we can hope, and for the most part that's what students want to do anyway, and then we just hope the teachers know what to say.
Excellent, thank you. I'm not sure if you may have answered this already, Nurun, but there was a lot of interest in the chat about your custom GPT. I just wondered if you could explain a little bit about your experience of building that and how it worked for you.
Thanks, Gemma. Yes, I was just trying to answer all the questions that came through in the chat, and I think I managed to answer the last one there. So with the custom GPT, we have a partnership with Bolton College, and Bolton College have developed this system, First Pass. And the custom GPT was actually a GPT that I created for my module to meet the requirements of my module and the specific needs of students with regards to some of the questions they have around understanding financial concepts, how to apply it in context using different case scenarios. So instead of directing them to use generative AI models readily available out there, I thought, how about we actually give an option to students to use generative AI as a learning partner, but a custom GPT, which will be trained as a Socratic partner. So it does not give away the answer to the students when they ask a question, but it will help them to think critically about the subject matter. It will help them to understand what you could do, or how could you present this information, what could you think beyond what you have just submitted as a draft that you've received feedback on. So even the feedback, the format in which the feedback was given was involving questions. So they were receiving questions in response to the questions they were asking the custom GPT. So I think most people, colleagues here, probably interested in knowing which system I have used for this. Or software, it's First Pass. And if anyone's interested to know more about it, then they could get in touch with Aftab Hussain. I will pop the link to Aftab's LinkedIn profile on the chat, and I think colleagues may be able to find out more about how they can use it, because at the moment Bolton College is inviting colleagues, academics, as well as researchers to implement First Pass chatbot system into different, I think, processes to see whether it could be used as a generative AI platform that uses a closed loop system in order to, I think, address some of these concerns we have around GDPR and privacy issues.
Excellent.
Thank you, Gemma.
Yeah, thank you. And one question that I think could go out to any of the three of you, actually, so feel free to decide between you who would like to answer it, is how can we determine where to draw the line between AI as a learning tool and AI as a shortcut? Happy for any of you to answer that one.
I don't think we have enough time, Gemma, to answer that one. And this comes back to just my point around why many people are actually burying their head in the sands and not even opening the conversation, because they just don't know where that would exist, and why are shortcuts a problem, which is why I made the point of, you know, what is our concern? Is our concern simply about work for work's sake, or is our concern instead about what's needed in the workplace? Okay, their time in university and the skills that we develop is relatively small, but actually what they need in the workplace is a workplace that has AI, and therefore what we need to be able to do is make sure that we're giving them the training around what might be out there, and just the confidence to try stuff and to ask questions, and more importantly, be in communities like this. I think that's really important, but I don't think any of us could at this point in time say where that line is, which is why again, academic offences panels, I'm talking to staff, they come forward, but that never makes it to a panel because they don't want to be the one to say, I think this is AI, because then they could be taken on that, because how do I prove that? I've made an accusation against you in your work and I have no proof of that. So yeah, I think that's I don't think there's ever going to be a place where we can find that line, and we have to decide the whole authenticity and the value add and making change. I think that becomes more important.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really quite difficult to find where that line's going to be, and at some point you kind of have to go, is finding the line important, or is actually moving forward and supporting the students with what we're dealing with the more important issue here? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I'm just going to share the word cloud that we had at the start that froze for us. So just so that you can see what everyone has put down in terms of what they feel the largest current challenge is for them in terms of digital assessment. And I mean, unsurprisingly, generative AI is quite high on there. Authenticity and consistency as well are two other large areas. But yes, it's interesting to see some of the things that are coming up in terms of what you feel are the main issues at the moment. I think, bearing this in mind, I'm going to move on to our next part of our meeting. So the next part of our meeting, we're going to talk about where you, as members of the SIG, would like to see the discussions in terms of digital assessment going. And because we're going to move on into that kind of discussion section, I am going to stop recording at this point so that you feel able to kind of share everything that you would like to be able to share on that Padlet without it being recorded. So I'm just going to stop that first.